when you're not speaking during the Q&A session. Please type * hands up into the chat box so we can cue people speaking, and please do not interrupt people mid-sentence while they are speaking. Democrats Abroad is a volunteer-driven organization. Help us register Americans from all over the world for the 22 midterm elections. The easiest way to make a small contribution is simply by visiting the website democratsabroad.org/donate. And last but not least, I encourage you to share the knowledge of this session with your family, friends, co-workers, or even a stranger on the park bench. Beautiful conversations can result out of that. My name is Lidana Moore, also known as Jasmine Diane Moore. You're Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus Chair and DPCA voting representative for Democrats Abroad Switzerland, and today's host. Joining on today's call is our co-host Sharon Hatchett and our wonderful guest, Frances Causey. Ms. Hatchett, it was great having you for the Democrats Abroad Switzerland Juneteenth event this year. And we are very, very honored to have you with us again today. Hello and welcome, Ms. Hatchett.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hatchett currently serves as the president of the Together is Better Alliance, a nonprofit committed to dismantling systemic racism through education. Prior to her retirement, Ms. Hatchett practiced law for close to 30 years with a global automotive manufacturer based in Detroit, Michigan. With her legal practice was primarily focused on international legal matters. In doing so, she traveled extensively from Detroit and worked as an expat in Zurich, Switzerland, and Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Ms. Hatchett also has a long history of volunteerism, including prior to her retirement. Currently, she serves on the League of American Orchestras Board of Directors, the Advisory Board for Coaster Cycles, and the Council of Legal Advisors for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Incorporated. Ms. Hatchett is also an active supporter of the Chicago Sinfonietta, a classical music orchestra formed in 1987 by Maestro Paul Freeman, a Black man committed to providing people of color access to a career path in the classical music field. Joining us on today's call is Frances Causey. Hello and welcome, Ms. Causey.
Hi there. Great to be here. We've been looking forward to this, Nick and I.
And so are we. Thank you very much for joining today. Frances Causey is a former CNN senior producer, TED contributor, and Emmy Award-winning director, and is known for her movies Oklahoma City, Bombing CNN, which was released 1995, Heist, Who Stole the American Dream, released in 2011, and The Long Shadow, released in 2017. With TLS, Frances Causey traces her family's legacy of white privilege, placing it into the context of her history of anti-Black racism in the United States that began with slavery and continues to impact our society today. Even from a very young age, Frances Causey felt that something about her surroundings weren't right. With a family history tied to Confederacy, much of her childhood was denied by growing up in what she considered the apartheid South and seeing how African Americans were treated. As a young child, she knew something was deeply wrong. She grew up with 2 African American women cooking and cleaning at her house, and recalls one story in particular that continued to resonate within her, well, all the way into adulthood. We'll find out what that story was. We're also joined by Tracy Merla, who is helping facilitate the Zoom chat, and our members and volunteers, Miriam, Sharon, Antar, Adrienne, and myself. We are going to be hosting the breakout room facilitations together with Candace as well. And without any further ado, and I'm very honored to open the floor to Ms. Sharon Hatchett and Frances Causey.
Thank you so much, Jazz, for providing us this opportunity to talk today. And Frances, certainly it's an honor for me to interview you. We've known each other for many years because I had the privilege of traveling down to Ole Miss when she was going to preview the documentary for the very first time, and she was showing it to family members. And so that experience triggered me and others like Amania and others on the TIBA board to launch our organization. So it's been a wonderful journey. And so thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to talk to you, Frances. as Jazz alluded to, your family background really triggered your decision to do the documentary. And can you touch upon how that journey evolved for you, including once you produced the documentary, reactions from audiences, Black and white, to the documentary and the work that you have done to really put a bright light on the racial challenges and systemic racism in this country?
Great question. We go back a long way, don't we? And first off, I want to thank Jazz and I want to thank Tiba and Democrats Abroad for organizing this. A lot of hours and time goes into just trying to find a date. So we're here and, it's a great looking group. I, like a lot of people probably on this Zoom, couldn't put words as a child to what I was seeing in the South. And only later, I think, it troubled me and I did what I could as a child, and I saw what I saw, and a lot of the personal stories I saw are in the TED Talk and the things that went on in my family. And we never really discussed it. We never discussed this family history except to, a casual reference to a general in the Civil War, so I didn't really know a lot about my family. I knew my family had been around for a while. I knew there was a family home place in Virginia. And then once I got to college, I think, Sharon, and I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and probably would not have gotten into that university had I not been a legacy. A fifth generation legacy at that university, which is, of course, built by enslaved human beings and trouble later. We know what happened in Chapel Hill with monuments like are happening all over the US. But there was a demonstration against apartheid at UNC. And by that point, I was already I was very different. I knew I was going to do something very different than my family. They had been business people, and and I had a curiosity, like a lot of people on this call, just crushed, really crushed by what I saw. And of course, what I was experiencing paled into comparison to what was happening with apartheid in the United States, particularly the Southern, but one of the whole points of the movie is to talk about the political influence of the South and how that spread because of the enslavement of human beings in our country. The South spread that all throughout the country, and they really voted politically around that idea, this erroneous idea of white supremacy. And so when I discovered, I think I really I've never been in one of my films. I hope I'm never in one again, because it was challenging. Once I discovered the critical role that my uncle had played in bringing British law around slavery and making it into American law, I felt like I had to kind of follow my sword, if you will, and really reframe. History is a living organism, and you look at the scholarship of Dr. Horn, for instance. It's so illuminating, and history changes as we discover. Great minds like Dr. Horn discover new perspectives. In other words, the United States. He's written many books. The United States was kind of this pesky little colony, and England had ambitions globally, and so they wanted the enslaved folks to fight for them, and if they could somehow make it to the coast of Norfolk. And so I discovered all of these things and wanted to really connect the dots in one sitting, reframe our nation's history, apart from Lexington and Concord, all of these things that we had talked about, we had learned about. I knew that there was a narrative, and a white person needed to connect someone who had benefited to this day from those same policies and from that same history, connect the dots to today, to the impact of the marginalization of first Africans and later African Americans. And so the reaction to the film has been muted at times. A lot of people don't know what to make of it. Other people, like a lot of people on the Zoom, understood perhaps it was a narrative that enabled you to talk to your family and friends, or somehow crystallized and catalyzed what had happened, where we were in our country, where what happened, and where we are now with regards to the terrible burden that the African community and later the African American community has borne the brunt of. And so the longer we've swept that under the carpet and not dealt with it, you can imagine it's been really hard, to continue to get the film seen in the South. So the reaction, we could talk all day about the reaction, Sharon, but you've been there right along with us.
Yes.
One of the biggest honors of this whole journey has been getting to know you and Amania and what you've done with TIBA. And we continue to see the benefits of what the foundation you've laid there in Illinois. And we're so grateful.
Well, and Frances, going back to the documentary too, one of the items that stands out to me was, the conversation in the film about there being a white problem in this country. And what I look at also is the dynamics that have occurred since you created the film. And what I ponder at times is looking at what's happening today, is it that people have gotten worse relative to some of their behaviors, or is it that it was already there, but people are being more open and overt about it?
Well, it's a great question, right? And so I think what happened with the election of President Obama, it unleashed this simmering, cyclone underneath of about 30 to 40% of the country really believes that white is superior to Black. They learned it from their parents learned it from their parents. And so, but it's also good folk have come forward in response to that. And unfortunately with Mr. Floyd's death, you cannot continue to violently and institutionalize this inequity and not have it, Mr. Floyd's death catalyze that. Richard Rothstein catalyzed that for me after Ferguson. I found his paper on what had gone on with the housing in Ferguson, which was a huge part of the film. So let's be really honest and sanguine about this to some degree. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take generations to undo. We can't even have a national consensus that there was a wrong done. We keep, I think hopefully one of the things that comes up in the film for folks is that every time Africans and African Americans have made strides in our country, there's this white pushback, right? All the way to, which is why I told the Raytheon story, or the Lockheed story, right? Which is a more contemporary example. So things are changing slowly. We're starting to see some reparation around, movements around reparations. We're doing that as a production company. They're doing it in Evanston, other places in the country. So we've got we can't, there's no time for hand wringing, right? No, we need tangible bottom up action.
I agreed with you. And being mindful of the time, because I know that Jazz would like us to give the audience joining us the chance to pose questions to you. Thank you for opening the door to the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Jazz to engage the others who are on the call with us.
Yes, thank you very much, Sharon. And thank you very much, Frances, for all this enlightenment that you're actually sharing with us today. So we're opening the floor now to everyone in the Zoom to ask questions for Frances Causey. So please type in ** hands up into the chat so that we can cue the people. And I'll start with one question, and it might be a little bit of a critical question, but I've been watching some of the, another movie by another producer just recently this week, and this producer was constantly asked if she's using her white privilege to do the work. Did you encounter being that questioned a lot when you made your film?
Yes, and it's one that I contemplated a lot, Jazz. I really tried to have African Americans, scholars, tell the African and African American experience. I didn't feel like that was my story. It wasn't my story to tell. My story was the side the part I told in the film. I was very sensitive to the cultural appropriation argument. And the African American community has really embraced the film. There might be criticism out there, and I would love to hear it because it makes me a better filmmaker. But I think probably the harshest criticism I got was from a white liberal group in the Bay Area, that I wasn't somehow politically correct enough. They really wanted to take the story or take the film and have me be in a speaker's bureau and do all these kind of things. And while I'm sensitive to that, I think it misses the point that I had not heard a narrative from a white person talking about what this country had done from the 1600s all the way and really falling on the sword and saying, okay, I made the film for everyone, but as a white person, I wanted to speak to other white folks that had benefited from this history. And that's another whole story we could get into, how folks benefit, and maybe they're not as conscious of that, and certainly not as conscious of what's come at the cost of that white privilege in our country.
Absolutely. We have some people in the queue. Thank you very much, Frances, for that great answer. First up, Kaitlyn, then Cuthbert, then Bruce, then Miriam. So Kaitlyn, your question, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you for joining us today. My question is about something that you just said. My boyfriend, who's next to me but on a different screen, is the chair of the Democrats Abroad Reparations Task Force. So when you mentioned that your production company is working in the field of reparations, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, what your concept is, and how you came up with that.
So it's real simple in my mind, right? This is really about taking resources. It's not as popular and you don't hear it a lot, but taking resources from predominantly white communities and putting them in less resource-rich communities. It's really about money, right? And what was really apparent to me was, after reading these books, and I hope Nick will share I read over 30 books for the film. One of the most important ones was about capitalism and the role that enslaving human beings played in the foundation and perpetuation of the biggest economy the world has ever known. And just abject fairness, right? I mean, so what we're doing is we're publicizing things like Evanston, any community in the country that's in their city council, local level, are taking and seeing this frustration. And for instance, in Evanston, taking money, they voted to give African-American folks who own homes money to repair their homes. And so what we're doing is taking our licensing royalties and turning around small grants or larger grants where we can to individuals that we designate, that we read through press reports, that there was a woman recently who was hit by Ida, and she was caring for her grandchildren, and she lost her home and she lost her catering job to COVID. And so, we helped her out with a grant to get back into her house and to, get clothes and things like that. So we can all do that. I get a lot of hand wringing sometimes about how insurmountable, how do you undo 400 years of history? Well, there are many, many things that we all can do. And so, but I feel strongly that it's about, I think it's really, really important to make good on this equity through monetary reparations. I mean, it's key. I mean, so many of the problems in the African American community are related solely to poverty and this lack of generational wealth transfer that I speak of in the film that Jody talks about, for instance. And so it's you know, people are all for equity, but when you start actually, you know, talking about taking, for instance, educational resources from one PTA and moving it over to a, you know, a less resource rich school system, you know, then you start to get the pushback, you know, and that's what's got to change. We individually have to make amends where we can, whether or not I think our families owned, you know, enslaved human beings as mine did, tragically, or if your family, if you're white and you were in you know, and you were in this country in the 50s, chances are you benefited from housing, you benefited from employment, education. Your family got Social Security when African Americans were denied Social Security.
There's this great phrase that you said in one of your TED Talks that completely stuck with me. And I didn't even know that phrase. So when you're accustomed to privilege,
Right.
Equality feels like oppression, and that really nails it right there.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Next in the queue is Cuthbert.
Yes, it was a very good documentary. I just watched it before we started here, and so it was very interesting. But it's also very clear the denial, and it's like a religion in America. You know, it's like believing in Jesus. You know that, well, America was always great, and we always had believed in liberty and justice for everyone, and it's written in Thomas Jefferson and Self a Slave Owner is written this: all men are created equal. So it's like a religion, you know, it's like going to church every Sunday or something, and swearing to Jesus and believing in everything. And this is what enabled whites to suppress any guilt that they had. You see, their guilt of their atrocities and their horrors that they committed could be suppressed by this propaganda, this religious mentality that everything was right and just and so on. And it's like become like a national, it's the national neurosis that has to be suppressed. You know, it's like they're taking some kind of pill, you know, to push it all back and cut it off. And the thing is that this continues on, despite the fact that African Americans have pushed and pushed and pushed themselves forward with no support, no help from anybody, nothing, pushed themselves forward and survived all this is incredible. And also, not to forget the Native American people that are always forgotten. They were, you know, when something like 25 million people to a few million people in a genocide that's, you know, beyond the size of anything almost, you know, and even though it took place over a much longer period of time. But the thing is that, as I see it, the only way to get over this is for America to face what happened. And they haven't done that yet, but only partially, because they're pushed a step at a time. But if things started like, perhaps I wonder if do you think that any possibility or is any talk about like education of children in elementary school about the truth of what happened, and that what was done was atrocities, and this is in the South. And is that a way to maybe?
Yes.
How do you face
Yes.
this thing?
Absolutely, and we start to see it with generations, you know, in their 20s now, 18 and teens. We all have seen change, right? But it's really kind of older folks in a lot of ways. I mean, there's still obviously huge discrimination from all age groups. We've got to PTAs have got to really look at what their children are learning and demand that there be a truthful accounting, right? Cuthbert, we've so swept this under the rug for generations. I mean, as a journalist, the information is thrilling. When you read the scholars like Dr. Horn, Mr. Powell, and you connect the dots of a very different America, and you see how woven into the fabric, the DNA, the discrimination, and people the white supremacists, the Dixiecrats, it's the other thing that's important about the film, right? It's all about law, right? And then when the law changes, not enforcing that law. And so while we're advocating a bottom up, we're white allies to a Black-led movement, we need a top down from our leadership. We need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission on par with the Kerner Commission in the 60s that made recommendations that were not enforced, right? We need everyone to go to their planning and zoning commissions. And when they bake in segregation, unconscious or conscious, we need people to stand up and say no. And there's just not one facet of our country that is not impacted. If we could make progress on this one issue of undoing these wrongs, these historical wrongs that have roots in the present, and African Americans are suffering and they're dying at way disproportionate rates. And they're being denied the American dream at way disproportionate rates. And so if we can recognize, as you say, this one primacy, this one prime idea that there was a wrong that took place, and that we need to roll up our sleeves and make it right. And we need a commission. We need to all support HR 40. It's been talked about in committee. It would simply just study the impact of slavery and Jim Crow and make a series of recommendations. We can't even agree to do that, but we've already done this. We did this with Japanese Americans during World War II. I think each family, after we so wrongfully interned them, got $30,000. We know how to do this. We can do this. Support some of what's happening right now in Washington in terms of the earned child income, credit. There are a lot that when we increase the safety net, which is a fairness across all sectors, we make our society more just and fair. So support your senators and your representatives to pass those bills that we know disproportionately will help those that we intentionally, institutionally discriminated against. Disproportionately, those folks will be helped. And, a rising tide should lift all boats. That did not happen across our economy over the generations. The boat lifted, and we kept the ballast on folks trying to, through no fault of their own, right? So it's become what you speak of, right? This kind of myopic thinking, and we have to force change.
Right.
Thank you very much for that question, Cuthbert.
Just one, if I can make a very short comment here.
Yes, please.
To say that you can also see all the time in today and also in history, what makes difference is when white people and Black people have direct personal contact with each other.
That's right.
Like, and you're saying in your case that you had the woman that was working at your, at your house and things like that you knew personally. And then perhaps if you had never known this woman, she would never been there, and you would maybe never have the outlook that you have today.
That's exactly right. And I so credit Tiba, because Tiba's doing this exact work. White folk and Black folk are eating together, they're living together. And that's the economic disadvantage and the discrimination by white folks has prevented that. And then when we live together, we break bread together, we worship together, we realize that there's no difference. I mean, we know biologically there's no difference. There is no race. We're all the human race.
Right, that was the whole point of segregation.
Yes.
And that's what got John Brown to
thank you, Cuthbert, but we
make his
have
attack.
3 more people in the queue.
A real
Sorry,
hero.
we have to continue with the time. Thank you very much, Cuthbert. So next up in the queue, we have Bruce Murray.
Thanks to everyone for organizing this event. I heard that, and I know that it's really hard to find a date when everyone can get together. It seems to me so significant that it's happening on this date when there's so much intensity in Washington right now with the dual track infrastructure legislation. I just returned from the state of Minnesota, where people in northern Minnesota, indigenous people, are trying hard to stop the expansion of the Line 3 with tar sands running through the lake country there. And also in Minneapolis, where there's a proposal to change the way public safety is ensured in the next election coming up in November. And I was going to ask, what can we do to push the envelope and to make progress? And in the last segment, Frances Causey gave us a lot of things that we can do. And thank you very much for that. My question then is, how can you help us use your film specifically to push the envelope, whether at the local, state, or national level in the coming weeks and months?
Great, Bruce. And so there are many things you can do, right? You can support Black Lives Matter or organizing groups. They need their cars repaired, they need their houses repaired, they need groceries. You can financially support $100, $50 here, wherever you can. A lot of this, is available online now. You can go to your city council where they're maybe zoning, your county commission meetings. You can support, reach out to your political leadership and tell you that this is an issue that matters to you. You can start a TIBA chapter, just like Sydney did, just north of me in Green Valley, or is doing, right? You can, you can, if you see an unjust act, if it's safe to do so, speak out against it. Advocate at the local level for taking all of this gear we got in the post 9/11 era, all this armored personnel and all this kind of riot stuff, anything that puts a distance. African American communities want to be safe also. Let's get community policing. Let's get cops on the beat, walking these neighborhoods. And let's first and foremost, you can use, there's a 15-minute version of the film that we made. There's a study guide with books. You can try, and where it comes down to the rubber meets the road sometimes, I think people see this blind spot that people in their lives have when it comes to the level of discrimination that they fail to acknowledge. And so I think it helps to personalize it. Did your family receive Social Security? Could you think about how your family benefited when other Black families were denied those same rights? Housing, by the time you get around to 68 with the Fair Housing Act, as Richard will talk about, I'm sure at length, you've not, African American families have not benefited from housing prices going up in this unparalleled economic prosperity. I mean, heck, in the 50s, we're as Mr. Litwack, Professor Litwack talks about, we were still lynching, an African American World War II hero in South Georgia in 1957. So awareness, personalize it. How an African American mother feels sending her 18-year-old son out on a Friday night versus a white woman, how a white woman might feel. There's just multitudes of ways.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Bruce, for that great question. We have two more in the queue, and I'm going to allow the session to proceed a little bit more so that we get in those two questions, because it definitely would be a shame if we don't have those questions, because we're hearing a lot of good questions. So next up in the queue is Miriam. Your question, please.
Yeah, it's not so much a question as a reaction to the dialogue that was happening between Cuthbert and Frances about what can we do and whose accountability and whose responsibility is it to do something. I wanted to thank Sharon and Jasmine for bringing us together with you, Frances, because your film is so important. As I tried to say before, and I want to say it in front of everybody who's listening, that this film was such a contribution to American history education for people like me, who suddenly had a new filter to see American history through. And it changed my perspective forever. And I wanted to connect it with something that I'm very involved in, both personally and professionally, and that is the working through of the Holocaust. It's another form of genocide and another form of reparations and another form of victim perpetrator dissension or potential dissension, but the top down happened right after the Second World War. Germany took responsibility for what they had done. And that made a big difference. And accountability in our country is almost intransigent. It's almost impossible because the pushback is so huge until today. So even an Abraham Lincoln and a LBJ and an Obama weren't enough. So it's really up to us to take on the victim perpetrator bystander roles in another way. And I wanted to just suggest two ways in which we could become active. And that is, one is the idea of not just being a bystander, because that means you had nothing really to do with it, but you let it happen, but to be an upstander, to be an activist who feels impacted by this story, whether you were the descendant of slaveholders or the descendant of slaves, is not the issue, but the issue is how accountable, how responsible do we feel? And the other issue is, Frances, you would be described today, and there's a new vernacular for this, the implicated subject, the descendant of the perpetrators. And the dialogue that happens between the descendants of victims and the descendants of perpetrators is very important. And I hope that we can encourage and support it as well. I just think dialogue is what we're trying to do now, and what we all need to consider how we can engage in it at every level that's available to us.
Thank you. And I want to note, yes, absolutely, in terms of the Holocaust and the tragedy there, we're doing a Zoom next, this obviously the themes are the same, right? The themes cross intersect. We're doing a Zoom next Thursday with a group called Change, Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education, right? And so we're really looking forward to that. And if dialogue leads to tangible change and action, then we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep trying to raise awareness of what's happened and reframe that narrative in a way that might one day lead to what Germany did. We do that here, that we somehow nationally acknowledge this, because we won't be whole, certainly not living up to our ideals that we all cherish. We're incomplete without it.
Thank you very much, Frances, and thank you very much, Miriam. When we're speaking about reparations, the last person in the queue is actually the go-to person within Democrats Abroad, Antar.
Hi, yes. Hold on. Yes, thank you for that, Jasmine. Yeah, what I have is a little bit of a reaction and a question. Now, Frances, I heard earlier you mentioned that there is an inconsistency with the idea of one tide lifts all boats. Oftentimes, we're of the mind where, this is the most progressive stance. This is indeed the most kind of all-inclusive stance that will aid anybody ailing. However, for the majority of the nation's history, it has been anything but that. America as a nation has been very reluctant to extend the bounty of its wealth, of its privilege, of its protection to Black bodies. And, there's a certain tension in progressive politics. For instance, for many people who supported Bernie Sanders, people like me, many people believe that, his policies would be
Antar,
one tide
you're
lifts
breaking
all
up very
boats.
much, sorry.
Now, personally, I don't believe that. I believe that you do need to have some kind of additional supplemental force to address generations of structural baked-in discrimination. One speaker in the documentary, he actually elicits the point that perhaps it's the identity of, those who consider themselves white that needs to change. Something needs to change where, white identity is not predicated upon dominance. And I think that, that was a keen point this gentleman made. Do you believe that in our lifetimes, we would see a necessary reconfiguration of white identity to the extent that progressive policies that lift all people will not be considered reparations, an identity that will see racial policies that bring about racial equity, like volunteering payments, volunteering finances to fund a church or fund a school would not be considered reparations, but something more socially transformative, something that would necessarily reconfigure the identity of what it means to be an American. Do you think that this is possible in this day and age? And if so, how?
Yeah, great question and comments. Right. So, I mean, I think, in terms of identity politics, I mean, politicians on both sides of the aisle have always used this issue to drive a wedge, whether it's the Southern strategy with Lee Atwater. I mean, Democrats have done it. Bill Clinton did it. And so we are at a place in our evolution, I think, where that is we're seeing through the looking glass that's what we do, that it's, when are we going to get to this point where we finally make some traction? And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I structured the film the way I did, to really look at the economics of it. And these are vaunted values in our country, and to point out that this has been the impact that we need to really address the most. And I want to support the African American community. I've read all kinds of papers on how, at one point in the 60s, they wanted to have their own state or cities, or, however, we need to explore these ideas of how we can bring about this equity. So where down the road, it's happened, it's done. We have that type of equity that truly reflects our ideals, and it's available to all Americans. But will it happen in our lifetimes? We've certainly, I think, made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but boy, we all know we have a long, long way to go. Do I think, honestly, it'll happen in my lifetime? Probably not. And I think we don't need to be Pollyannish about it and think it's going to be this way, or we want it to be this way. I mean, what's happening right now in our Congress is a great reflection of where the country truly is in terms of making that equity happen, right? You've got, and this is a story that I told that I hope maybe you'll watch. It's on YouTube. It's now out on YouTube. It's called Heist Who Stole the American Dream, right? And so it becomes a class issue. The politics of it we are so far beyond instituting the type of equity that you're talking about. And I talk about why that's the case. I interviewed Bernie Sanders for it. So we're starting to see a lot more Democrats look like conservative, maybe, or liberal Republicans, and that's the story that I tell in Heist Who Stole the American Dream, about what's happened. And this is all about income inequality. So much of the problems in our country, it's about income inequality. We turned our backs on, the middle class, right? And then of course, who gets, when jobs are gotten rid of, who gets let go, people that are most marginalized. And so I think what you're talking about, if I understand you correctly, it's like this inequity is at the core of who we are as a nation. And it's my life's work to reveal those laws, those political systems, whatever that is pursuing that agenda at the expense of our ideals, and certainly at the cost in real human lives and potential. And no group feels that any more than those inequities than the African American community here. And it's got to change. We cannot continue to have that kind of pressure. We cannot let African Americans deal with the effects of that. This is an American problem. It's not just a problem in the African American community.
Thank you very much, Frances, and thank you, Antar, for that great question. Unfortunately, Antar, we don't have more time for that part right now. We are moving forward. We will now be creating randomly chosen breakout rooms, which will be hosted by Miriam, Antar, Sharon, Adrienne, Bruce, and myself, and Candace, for a duration of 15 minutes. And after that, we will meet again in the main room and discuss what we spoke about in our breakout rooms.
Great.
All right, so everyone here, you should have seen a pop-up to go into the breakout room, and if you didn't, let me know.
Could I please be sent back to my breakout room?
Yeah, let me see how to do that.
Candace,
Yes.
I'm supposed to be chairing a breakout room, and
I think all three of us are, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what happened
I don't know
here.
what happened.
What is going on? All sessions are ending. All right, 1 second, everyone. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'll just wait.
We're having some breakout room conundrums, but okay.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. We had a little mix up with the breakout room, but it should be good now.
I was in one and then it just kicked me in here. I'm fine with either one.
All right, I think we're gonna try this again, and hopefully we got it. It should be yeah, it should work.
Are you
Thanks,
gonna do
everyone.
it? Sorry.
Wait, Candace, did you see my note that I have to be in the same room as Antar?
Yeah, you are now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Candace, but I'm still in your group. You just invited me again, and I'm still not with the group that I'm supposed to chair. So
You should have gotten an invite on your screen, Miriam.
I got one from you.
Yeah.
To join which room?
But I'm supposed to be chairing
Yeah, you should hit what you accepted from, hit the message that you got from me.
I declined from you, Candace, because I thought you were inviting me to your room.
No, she's inviting everybody.
Let me see. I'm sure we can get it. We can resolve it here. 1 second.
Very confusing.
Let's see. There's an.
If you have more rooms than participants, probably not so good.
Join
Did you
room
get,
4. Okay, join room 4. All right, let's see.
but yeah, great. And Emily and Carmen, you should have received an invite for the breakout room if you didn't let me know.
Hey, Candace, I did. It's just, I'm still in the middle of dinner. I'm so sorry.
It's all good, all good. We've all been there.
So I'm gonna
No
take
worries.
a wee pass on the interactive bit, but it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. We've all enjoyed it.
Great, yeah, glad you could join. Where are you calling in from?
From near Geneva. So I'm the Geneva chapter chair.
Oh my gosh, well, welcome, yeah. Well, I'm sure I will see each other at some point. I'm in Munich, so not too far away. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Right.
Apologies for not, we all have our mouths full.
I hear you.
All right.
Have a good one, Emily. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Great looking group.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
That time really flies.
Yeah.
Frances, you captured exactly what I wanted, what I was trying to say.
I did. I knew exactly where your heart was. And what May and I were talking about was one of the themes that I don't get asked a lot about, because the film sometimes is really framed in such a jarring way, you know, to redo this history and truly understand what happened in our country, is the Nominee Hall story, the Canadian pioneers story, and in a very tragic way, Mr. Willis's death with Lockheed. It's all about what Africans and African Americans have overcome to win self-determination in this system that was so tragically rigged against them. And May had expressed an adjective of being hopeful and empowered. And ultimately, that's what I hope the message of the film is, that we need to empower, that we're not whole as a nation, and we're not whole ourselves until we bring our brothers and sisters along that haven't benefited from our system yet.
Absolutely. I think my microphone is working now again. Well, welcome back. I hope you all had interesting discussions within your breakout rooms. Let's all hear what information, knowledge, experiences have been shared. We're going to start with Bruce, because I know that Bruce needs to catch a plane very soon. So Bruce, what have you experienced?
I want to thank the members of our group number 5. We began by talking about what was new for us, what we learned from the film. And one of them was learning about hundreds of years ago, a religious rationale being used for discrimination. If you're not Christian, then you're not inside, you're outside. And we also learned more about the economic component of racism. And we talked for some time about other aspects of institutional racism, whether it be housing laws or that old sense that you could be counted not as a 100% citizen, but maybe a 60% citizen. And in the end, we spent a little time talking about how some of us can really feel that weight of institutional racism, which can be described also as thinking, well, it seems like we're always making progress, but in the end, we wonder if any progress is being made.
Great. Thank you very much. Have safe travels, safe flight, and thank you for joining in today.
Thank you.
So the next, let's go with Vicky. How was your breakout room session?
Vicky is Miriam's nickname, right?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
That's okay, that's okay. That's how we know each other. So we were a very small group, and I, because of some technical confusion, I joined the group very late. So we had a very brief discussion, but it was interesting to hear different perspectives. And I think that that's probably a part of this experience of bringing us together. We talked about we looked at a film that was full of different perspectives and different levels. And here we are, people bringing different perspectives and levels together. The word humbling came from a white participant, and the person who brought a lot of experience as being an African-American participant knows about white supremacy and knows about whiteness and has studied whiteness with or without both historically and from her own experience. So we shared a lot in a very short period of time that was very enriching. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Miriam. And Antar, how did your breakout room go?
Yeah, it went, hold on. It went quite well. We discussed many different points of the film, from education and or lack thereof, to really understanding what it's like coming from the South, coming from a legacy that essentially was part of the perpetuation of this, or at least the origin of it, and now transforming into active repair, working towards repairing and healing the wound that was caused. On other points, focused on, exploring what it means to be from the South, knowing the different connections and what was told and what was hidden or veiled and had to be learned either in higher education or through speaking to family members. It's very, very interesting to get this perspective, from me, like I know how I got this information, but to see how, a system like white supremacy, it defines itself also not just by the way it can integrate into other legal and judicial systems, but how it shields itself from being easily viewed, how it shields itself from those who even benefit from it. So it was very, very enriching for me also to understand that perspective, yes.
Thank you very much, Antar. And next up, Adrienne.
Thank you very much, Jazz. I was in group 2 with Anne and Bruce and Beth and Tracy. And so some of the takeaways were that, just realizing the inherent privilege, that has been afforded white people versus Black people, and that it was really important, or a useful tool, that this film was told from the perspective of a white Southern woman of privilege. And also, Bruce made a really good point about it being a good introductory or entry-level summary for people to make the topic accessible. I think it's told in a very, non-confrontational way, and I think that that's a good thing. And he made the point of that, because of the way that America is structured, that it takes, it is a white problem, and that, fish discover water last. So I liked the way that he framed that as well. What else do I have here? Sorry. Oh, and Anne made a really good point as well about how the film, the way that it was structured, really helped her understand or retain the information better, particularly about America post-Reconstruction. And I think that's a really important point as well, because a lot of people don't understand why we are still in, suffering the consequences of that. There was, that was really a time where Reconstruction was a time where there was hope, and there was interracial communities, and then everything, the clock just got turned back, and we're still fighting against that now. So I think that's a really important context for people to understand that that's why what we're actually trying to get now is maybe a third Reconstruction to move ahead, but we all have to work together to do that. And the words that people used were enlightened, inspired, informed. Tom Willis's story really made an impact for Tracy, motivated and connected. And so over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Sharon, how about you?
Yes, thank you. I was in group 7, and members of our group were Sydney from Arizona, and Stace, Robin, Buck London, Peter Gillespie, and I can't pronounce the words properly. I am Provence. If I was pronouncing that wrong, forgive me. But the general takeaways that came up in our conversation and looking at the long shadow was, one was that when you're focusing on the injustices that have occurred over the centuries against Black people, it's just daunting to see how it's just so pervasive and non-ending, and it's just had no idea of how much dominance the Southern states had over the politics of this country and the oppression of Blacks until watching the documentary. And so that was really an awakening, and the battle is continuing. One of our other members talked about the fact that having lived outside the US for 20 years, there is really no true awareness of what's going on in the country here in the States. And having been home right after the death of George Floyd to really confront how tragic it is, the race relations in this country, an effort was undertaken on a personal level to really get up to speed on what's happening in the country, doing the personal work necessary in order to grow and understand the impact of colonialism on this country and the politics and the impact in a very inappropriate manner. The word white problem kept coming up. There's a recognition among all the people in our group about the issue of that there being truly a white problem in this country that needs to be addressed. And one of our members talked about a lack of awareness, in part relocating from Brazil and then ultimately moving on to France. But there's a need to truly educate and make people aware of some of the challenges. Among the adjectives used among our members in relative to how the documentary made them feel, sad, ashamed, and committed were the words used by one person. Ashamed, depressed, yet hopeful by another. And then finally, another person indicated sad, ashamed, and entitled in recognition of the fact that being white, they have the opportunity to live an entitled life to, contrary to that of those who are people of color and the history here in the States that was depicted. So it was a very informative conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sharon. Candace, your breakout room.
Sure, thanks, Jazz. So I stayed back in the main room for everyone who was popping in and out, but we still managed to have some good conversations. And I just wanted to speak again to you, Frances, for allowing this to be used by Democrats abroad and making this event just accessible from that point of view, that people could watch it at their own pace. And the people who were cooking dinner or caring for someone could also access the event. So one of the main things that came up in our conversations that were happening back in the main room was just, again, education. And in light of this documentary too, I think I have to think back to the Juneteenth film event that we did as well. And the the comment that appeared again and again was that I had never really learned about this in school, at least in my breakout room back then. It's not necessarily something that is built into a lot of curriculums right now. And unfortunately, it's not something that we can expect of a lot of public education curriculums in the US at this point. So I think having said that, there's a lot of work to do, obviously, with public education policy. And I think we have a responsibility right now to still be educating ourselves through conversations like these, through films like the one we're talking about tonight. So.
Absolutely.
And I have to just say too, I mean, one last thing is I do think it's really beautiful that we're all here tonight from Democrats Abroad. And one of the unique things about this conversation is just, I mean, how many states do we have represented on this call right now? And again, it's conversations that we would never be having, networks that wouldn't have been brought together if it wasn't, you know, for this and the film in this particular context. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Candace. I also had the pleasure of having very interested and interesting people in my breakout room. And what stood out there when we speak about the emotions or adjectives used was that sense of empowerment, relief, encouragement was felt. And that is actually something that we all kind of felt watching this. There's so many emotions that everybody feels. It doesn't matter if you're Black and it doesn't matter if you're white. That is what we feel. Of course, you have those people that do not believe that there is a racial problem anyway, but you know, that's there. What also stood out that some feel like this movie is like feeling a Band-Aid being torn off. And I think I can really second that, because yes, the movie is very accessible and easy to understand and easy to watch, but it's not being like finger pointing. No, it has a very educational context, especially for white people who have never encountered, never thought about learning the history, and never were pulled into the history that much as African American people are. Yeah, so that really was like mainly one of the contents of what was spoken about here. Also going back to the main question of reparations. And we have a long, long way ahead of us. Thank you all for being in these breakout rooms and being part of that.
Jasmine,
yes.
I didn't get to report our room. We had a great conversation.
Oh, there you are. Yes, please do.
I didn't think I was going to be able to do it because my internet ended up being fantastic. And I'm so glad because two people that you invited from the States ended up being in our room, one from California and one from Chicago. And Amania said that this film, she's with Tiva, that this is like part of their onboarding process to watch this film. And I could see how that could be very helpful. And I don't mind telling everyone, I've already tapped Jazz to do this screening for FALCO, the Federation of American Women's Clubs Overseas. So Frances, you'll be getting Jazz. Now everyone knows that you promised to do this for me. But as soon as I watched the film yesterday night with my Swedish husband, he was in Sweden, I was in DC. And we had the discussion, and I said, I wish every white person I know could watch this. And Jazz said that he wished this was, you know, part of the curriculum for everyone, and I agree. And our group, we talked about Christina from Norway, was very similar to Frances in that she knew when she was a child that something was wrong, that she couldn't go to school with her friends, these people that she loved, and she knew something was wrong. What was different though between Christina and Frances is that her family, they could talk about it. And also on a road trip, when Christina was 12, they ended up in Arkansas, and Christina saw some things that horrified her, and her whole family was horrified. So they could talk about those things. And that's not surprising to know that Christina was woke back then, the Christina that we know now. Another person on the call, I hope I say it right, Sharon in Austria, she remembers her father, I believe, had at least had a Jewish friend purchase land, or a Jewish friend offered to purchase land for their family in the Pittsburgh area because her father wouldn't have been able to do it himself. So this Jewish ally friend did it. And then in a safe period of time, resold it to their family. And that reminded me of what we're seeing in the news recently about homes owned by African Americans being undervalued. And one woman in particular had a white friend stand in and act as if that was her home, his home, and the valuation was much, much higher. So we're still seeing those things. And then that's all I've got in my notes, but I know that our friend Mania ended on a positive note from Tiva, just how hopeful and positive and reminding us how important these conversations are. And I'm proud of us for having this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to your breakout room group too. Sharon,
Yes.
Sharon and I, we have known each other for many years, and I've always been very inspired by the work that you have done and your dedication in spreading knowledge and education. And speaking of education, I think there's a common consensus that that is the main priority that we have to focus on. Tiva is one of many of your engagements which are dear and near to your heart. Can you introduce Tiva for us and tell us why building bridges to other organizations is so important, especially African-American focused organizations?
Yes, thank you for that. Firstly, Tiva is important to us, and many of our board members are on this call, and I don't know if they can raise their hands on the screen so that people know who everyone is. Are they waving or just putting like a hand up on the tab on the screen? But we have a broad range of members, and what we stand behind is dismantling systemic racism through education. That has always been important for us. And as I indicated early on, after we became aware of Frances's documentary, it became a critical component of us coming together because it was so much of. And early on, Amania and I came together. I'm stopping my video because my Wi-Fi is unstable here. Kids are getting out of school, and when they get home in my area, things get kind of wobbly. So bear with me. But Frances's documentary was so compelling. Amani and I started showcasing the documentary early on. I asked her, could I take it back to the Chicago area? I needed people to see the documentary. Showed it to Amania. She said, I'm too busy. I don't have time to do this. I showed it to her. She got so hooked into it. We went running off bases and started showing it to educators-based organizations, the League of Women Voters, Illinois Education Association Board of Directors, the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago, you name it, we were everywhere. The benefits of us doing that and bringing a film to the Chicago metropolitan area and beyond is that we found that there was a hunger for this type of information. And so we formed alliances with other groups who were doing the work of social and racial justice around the Chicago metropolitan area. And that hence created our organization, Together is Better Alliance. We also worked with the Baha'i Temple and so many others in doing some great work. Our name, Together is Better Alliance, it really stems from the fact that when we first formed, we realized we could not be all things to all people. And so, I take the analogy that systemic racism is the elephant in the room. No one organization can swallow that elephant by themselves. We'll all take our incremental bites at that elephant, whether it is focusing on redlining, police violence, the need for education in that space, to deal with, for example, the educational issues of healing everyday racism in our schools and dealing with some of the issues of racism, whatever the case may be. And so we have created a collaboration among not only Tiva, but other organizations. We work with Interfaith Montgomery out of Alabama. We have relationships that we're developing across the country. Frances put us together with a group out of Athens, Georgia. So, for us, we feel collaboration is critical. We feel that having conversations with not only Blacks in the room, but whites in the room is much important, because if we don't talk, build the relationships, we're not going to have the positive growth that we need. One of our board members, Van Gilmer, who's on the screen, and Bruce Bondi, they're part of a group called the Montgomery Travelers. They saw the documentary, and then a group of people went down to Montgomery, Alabama before the team did. And that educational prep work, as well as traveling together, put Blacks and whites together who didn't otherwise know each other. And Bruce and Van have become best buds. Their friendship just cracks me up. I mean, how well they engage with each other. And so our relationships continue to grow. And studies have shown that organizations and diversity enhances the caliber of organizations, businesses, whatever. You're bringing in diversity of perspectives, everything. And so, yeah, Bruce, stop that. So it's an incredible opportunity. May Smith, she brings her National Education Association, Illinois Education Association board background to the table. And so it's a rich experience. I'm hoping that the engagement that we're doing even together today will be the beginnings of a beautiful relationship going forward. Our website is togetherisbetteralliance.org. For those of you who haven't looked, if you go on site, I want to highlight that on October 13th, Richard Rothstein, who's featured in the documentary, is doing a program under our TIBA Takes Conversation series, and he authored The Color of Law. He'll speak on reversing segregation. And in our website, and when you scroll down under our work tab toward the bottom, you will see that there is a link for registering to join us if you have to stay up late at night or early in the morning, whatever the case. We welcome your participation. We've also stepped up and done some things like creating virtual tours for people who wish to get some experience with the Truth and Reconciliation type of programs. We have the Southern Poverty Law Center down in Alabama. We also had the Amani, why don't you list them all by name? I don't have them right off the top of my head here. Let me see here. I can find it too. Hold on a minute. I have notes, and they. Okay, we have the DuSable Museum. We have the Equal Justice Initiative down in Montgomery, Southern Poverty Law Center, the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation in Tulsa, and the Greenwood Rising History Center also in Tulsa. So we took the time to engage with these these museums, because we realized during this COVID environment, people can't travel, and we're trying to bring some educational opportunities to them. So we're committed to the work. We're finding that our friendships are strengthening with others doing the similar work. And with Frances and all on this call and Zoom today, we thank you so much for this opportunity. And as Amani is noting, if you look at our virtual tour details on our website, there you can easily access what transpired in those virtual tours. Unless there's any, I know we have time constraints, but is there, if any of our board members have wished to say anything briefly, is there time to do that? If not, I understand.
Unfortunately not, Sharon. We do have to move on.
Okay.
But thank you very much. We are going to share the details, how we can get in touch with you, how our members can get in touch with you, and especially with TIBA to visit those screenings as well. And I'm so sure that we are building alliances and building bridges to work even more closely together in the future, as we already have started. Is Frances still with us?
I'm here.
Great. Do you have any final words that you'd like to share with us?
I shared them in the chat. It's been such a privilege. Each and every person here has made me a better filmmaker with your comments and your participation. And sometimes it's a long, lonely path making documentaries. It's hard, it's time consuming, it's expensive, but it's when you see your films out there in the world and their impact and the courage and honesty that you all shared, it just keeps me going the next day, keeps me going. So anyway, thank you, Tiba and all the organizers and Jazz and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're actually really at the end of today's session. So again, a big thank you goes out to Frances Causey and Nick Kelso from The Long Shadow. A big thank you goes out to Sharon Hatchett from the Together is Better Alliance. And also a big thank you to everybody in the background, to Tracy, to Candace, to Vicky, Antar, Adrienne, Bruce, Sharon. We had Candace, and well, yeah. So if you want to stay in touch with us, you could always visit us on democratsabroad.org/BC. That's the website of the Global Black Caucus. You could also visit the website of TIBA, that's togetherisbetteralliance.org. And the movie will still be available to watch on thelongshadowfilm.com/DA until this Sunday. So if you want to watch it again, please do. Or if you want to share it with more white friends of yours out there, please do. And I'm very sure that we will host another event around this movie again. Speaking of events, there's one more event called Spill the Beans coming up October 19th. It's a Zoom event, and that is going to be with a very special guest called Sola Adelavo. And she is going to talk about why is it so important that I vote from abroad, her experiences living in Switzerland. Again, thank you everybody for joining today's call. It was great hearing all those voices, all those thoughts, all those emotions, and we'll see you at the next screening event with the Global Black Caucus. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Woo-hoo.
Bye.
Very good.